Breaking news, Arsenal make move for Victor Osimhen. Football fans stop scrolling because the Victor Osimhen transfer story has just entered another dramatic chapter and Arsenal are once again at the centre of the storm. For weeks, supporters have been asking one question. Could Victor Osimhen really become an Arsenal player? And now the answer is becoming much more interesting. Reports emerging today indicate that Arsenal have discussed the possibility of signing the Nigerian superstar from Galatasaray. But let me make something very clear from the beginning. This is not an official Arsenal signing yet. There is no confirmed announcement that Osimhen has signed for Arsenal. There is no completed transfer, but there is something extremely important happening behind the scenes. Arsenal have reportedly opened discussions around the possibility of bringing Osimhen to North London, and that alone has sent the transfer world into overdrive. Because we are not talking about an ordinary striker. We are talking about Victor Osimhen, a striker known for explosive speed, physical strength, aggressive pressing, powerful finishing and an ability to turn half chances into goals. And Arsenal have been searching for exactly that kind of attacking threat. The big question now is, could Mikel Arteta finally get his superstar striker? Let's break everything down. According to the latest reports, Arsenal's interest in Osimhen has become serious enough for discussions involving Galatasaray to take place. That is significant, because Galatasaray are not a club that desperately needs to sell their star striker. They invested heavily to bring Osimhen to Turkey permanently. And Osimhen is under a long-term contract. That means Arsenal cannot simply walk into Istanbul, place a small offer on the table and expect Galatasaray to say yes. This could become a major negotiation. And there is another huge problem: money. Osimhen's current salary package is reportedly extremely high. Recent reports say Arsenal have made it clear that they do not want to break their wage structure to sign him. In other words, Arsenal may be interested, Arsenal may want the player, but Arsenal also want the player to meet their financial conditions. And that is where this transfer could either explode into life or completely collapse. Imagine the situation. Arsenal want Osimhen. Osimhen is reportedly open to the possibility of a Premier League move. Galatasaray want to protect one of their biggest stars. And then there is the question of salary. 3 sides, 1 superstar striker, 1 enormous transfer battle, and potentially 1 massive decision. Now let's talk about why Arsenal would want Osimhen. Think about Arsenal's attacking system. Mikel Arteta wants intensity, he wants movement, he wants players who can press defenders, he wants attackers who can threaten space behind the defensive line, and most importantly, he wants goals. Osimhen brings many of those qualities. He is not simply a penalty box striker. He can run behind defenders, he can attack crosses, he can challenge centre-backs physically, he can press from the front, and when he gets momentum, he can be terrifying for defenders. That is why Arsenal's reported interest is attracting so much attention, because this isn't simply about signing another squad player. This would potentially be a statement signing, a signing that tells the Premier League Arsenal are serious about competing at the highest level. And now imagine Osimhen wearing the Arsenal shirt. Imagine him standing at the Emirates Stadium. Imagine the atmosphere when his name is announced. Imagine him receiving a pass through the middle. 1 touch, 2 touches, and then goal. That is the dream Arsenal supporters are beginning to imagine. But before we get carried away, there are serious obstacles. The first obstacle is Galatasaray. The Turkish giants have already demonstrated how highly they value Osimhen. He has become one of the central figures of their project. So why would they willingly let him go? The answer would have to involve a huge financial package. Arsenal would need to convince Galatasaray that selling Osimhen makes sense, and that could be incredibly difficult. The second obstacle is Osimhen's salary. This could actually be more complicated than the transfer fee. Arsenal have reportedly told the player that he would need to accept lower wages if the move is going to happen. That means the decision may eventually come down to Osimhen himself. Does he want the Premier League badly enough to accept different financial terms? Does he want the Arsenal project? Does he believe Arsenal can give him the platform to compete for major trophies? Or is he comfortable remaining the superstar of Galatasaray? Those questions could decide everything. And then there is another fascinating part of this story. Arsenal's discussions with Galatasaray did not reportedly appear out of nowhere. There have been conversations between the clubs involving other Arsenal players and Galatasaray's interest in Arsenal talent. That opened a channel between the two clubs. And Osimhen's name entered the conversation. Suddenly something that looked like a transfer rumour began to look much more serious. But again, serious interest does not equal a completed transfer. That distinction is extremely important. We have seen this many times in football. A club can hold talks. A player can be interested. An agent can negotiate. A selling club can name a price, and yet the transfer can still collapse. So Arsenal supporters should not celebrate an Osimhen signing just yet. But they absolutely have a reason to pay attention because the door is open. And the next few days could be extremely important. There is also another question. What happens to Arsenal's current strikers if Osimhen arrives? Arsenal already have major attacking options, so if the club spends heavily on another elite striker, there could be consequences for the squad. Competition for places would become fierce. Every training session would matter. Every Premier League match would matter. And Arteta would have a huge decision to make every week. Who starts? Who comes off the bench? Who plays centrally? Could Osimhen play alongside another striker? Could Arsenal change their attacking structure? These are not small questions. A player like Osimhen doesn't arrive simply to sit on the bench. If Arsenal sign him, he would expect to be one of the main attacking weapons, and Arsenal would expect goals. Lots of goals. Now let's come back to the biggest headline. Arsenal want Victor Osimhen. That is the story developing right now. But the deal is not done. Galatasaray remain a major obstacle. Osimhen's salary remains a major obstacle. And Arsenal's financial conditions remain a major obstacle. Yet despite all of that, the conversation has begun. And once Arsenal start seriously discussing a player of Osimhen's level, you cannot ignore it. So Arsenal fans, keep your eyes on this story, because what happens next could determine whether this becomes one of the biggest transfers of the summer or one of the biggest transfer stories that never actually happens. And that brings us to the most important question. What does Victor Osimhen want? Because if the Nigerian striker decides that Arsenal is the destination he wants, everything could change. And in part 2, we're going to look at exactly that. We're going to examine Osimhen's position, the salary battle, Galatasaray's stance, and the potential transfer fee that could decide this entire saga. Don't go anywhere, because the Osimhen to Arsenal story is getting hotter. Osimhen to Arsenal. The money battle begins. Welcome back. If you thought the Victor Osimhen to Arsenal story was already dramatic, wait until you hear what could determine whether this transfer actually happens. Because right now, Arsenal have a problem. Actually, they have several problems. The first is Galatasaray, the second is money, and the third could be the most important of all, Victor Osimhen himself. Let's start with Galatasaray. Osimhen is not a player Galatasaray are desperate to get rid of. Quite the opposite. He is one of their biggest stars. He has become a major part of the club's ambitions, and because he is tied to Galatasaray on a long-term contract, Arsenal have very little leverage unless they are prepared to meet Galatasaray's demands. That is why this transfer could become extremely expensive. Galatasaray know that Osimhen is one of the most valuable strikers in European football. They know there is Premier League interest. They know elite clubs have followed him for years, and they know Arsenal are looking for attacking reinforcements. So from Galatasaray's perspective, why sell cheaply? They don't have to. That is the problem Arsenal face. Now let's talk about the salary. This is where the situation becomes fascinating. Reports today say Arsenal are not prepared to simply match Osimhen's current financial package. Arsenal reportedly want the player to reduce his salary demands. That means there is potentially a very simple equation. If Osimhen accepts Arsenal's financial conditions, the deal becomes easier. If Osimhen refuses, the entire transfer could collapse, and that gives the Nigerian striker enormous power because he has a choice. Stay at Galatasaray, continue as one of the club's biggest stars, or take the risk of moving to the Premier League, and Arsenal would represent a completely different challenge. The Premier League is one of the most competitive leagues in world football. Every match is intense, every defender is dangerous, every away game can become a battle. But for a player like Osimhen, that challenge could also be an opportunity. Imagine what scoring regularly for Arsenal in the Premier League could do for his reputation. Imagine Champions League nights at the Emirates. Imagine facing Manchester City, Liverpool, Manchester United, Chelsea, Tottenham, and scoring against them. That is the type of stage elite strikers dream about. So perhaps the question isn't simply, will Arsenal pay Osimhen enough? Maybe the real question is, how badly does Osimhen want Arsenal? Because if he truly wants the move, he may have to make a financial sacrifice. And this is where negotiations become fascinating. Arsenal have reportedly drawn a line. They don't want to destroy their wage structure. That is understandable, because once one player receives an enormous salary, other players may demand similar treatment. Football clubs have to think beyond one transfer. They have to think about the entire dressing room. If Arsenal give Osimhen a huge package, what happens when another star asks for a new contract? What happens when another player says, if Osimhen earns that much, why shouldn't I? That is why Arsenal have to be careful. They want the striker, but they don't want to lose control of their salary structure. And this is where Mikel Arteta and the Arsenal recruitment team have a huge decision. Do they compromise or do they walk away? Because Arsenal have shown in recent years that they are willing to be disciplined in the transfer market. They won't necessarily pay any price simply because the player is famous. They want the right player at the right conditions. And Osimhen's situation is testing that philosophy. Now let's talk about the transfer fee. Reports have suggested figures in the region of £58 million to £60 million could potentially be enough for Galatasaray to consider a sale, although the exact terms remain a matter of negotiation. And this is important. A reported asking price is not the same thing as an agreed transfer fee. Until the clubs reach an agreement, everything remains negotiable. Arsenal could offer a lower guaranteed fee with bonuses. Galatasaray could demand more money up front. There could potentially be discussions involving players. There could be add-ons. There could be performance bonuses. There could be Champions League related payments. There are many ways a transfer can be structured. And that is why the headline figure isn't always the full story. But Arsenal clearly need to decide how much they are willing to spend, because Osimhen isn't going to be cheap. Now let's look at the player himself. Victor Osimhen has already experienced huge pressure in his career. He has played in France, he has played in Italy, he has played in Turkey, and now the Premier League could represent the next major chapter. His goal-scoring record has made him one of the most recognisable African forwards in world football, and for Arsenal, signing him would also be a statement about ambition. But there is another issue. Competition. Osimhen would not be walking into an Arsenal team with no attacking options. He would have to compete for minutes. He would have to adapt to Arteta's tactical demands. He would have to press. He would have to combine with Arsenal's midfielders. He would have to learn how Arsenal build attacks. And perhaps most importantly, he would have to deliver immediately. Because when a club pays a huge transfer fee for a striker, supporters don't want patience. They want goals. They want trophies. They want big performances. And that pressure would be enormous. But perhaps that's exactly why Arsenal are interested. They don't need a striker who needs 5 years to develop. They want someone who can make an immediate impact, someone who can change games, someone who can score when the team is struggling, someone who can turn one chance into 3 points. And Osimhen fits that profile. Now let's return to Galatasaray. There is a fascinating psychological battle happening here. Galatasaray can say, we don't need to sell. Arsenal can say, we won't overpay. Osimhen can say, I want the move. And the final agreement has to satisfy everyone. That is why this transfer could go down to the final stages of the window. One phone call could change everything. One improved offer, one salary compromise, one decision from Osimhen, one change in Galatasaray's position. And suddenly, boom. The deal moves forward, but the opposite can happen too. Arsenal refuse to improve their offer. Osimhen refuses to lower his salary. Galatasaray refuse to sell. And the entire transfer collapses. That is the danger. So what should Arsenal supporters believe right now? Believe that the interest is serious enough to monitor. The Osimhen effect. What happens if Arsenal sign him? Now let's imagine the impossible becoming possible. Victor Osimhen walks into the Emirates Stadium. The Arsenal shirt is in his hands. The cameras are flashing. Thousands of supporters are watching. And the announcement is made. Victor Osimhen is officially an Arsenal player. If that happens, Arsenal would not simply be signing another striker. They would be signing a player capable of changing the identity of their attack. And that is why this transfer is so exciting. Let's forget the rumours for a moment. Let's forget the negotiations. Let's forget the money. Let's talk football. What would Osimhen actually give Arsenal? First, pace. Serious pace. Osimhen is dangerous when there is space behind the defence. That creates a completely different problem for defenders. If centre-backs push high, Arsenal can play the ball behind them. If defenders drop deep, Arsenal have more space in front of them. That means Osimhen can potentially create problems even before he touches the ball. Defenders have to think about him. They have to track him. They have to communicate, and that can create space for Arsenal's other attackers. Second, physicality. Osimhen is powerful. He can fight for aerial balls. He can challenge centre-backs. He can protect the ball, and he can attack crosses. That could give Arsenal another dimension. Sometimes football isn't about beautiful combinations. Sometimes you need someone who can win a physical battle, someone who can put pressure on defenders, someone who can attack a dangerous cross, someone who can turn chaos into a goal. That is where Osimhen could be extremely valuable. Third, goals. At the end of the day, that is why you sign a striker. Goals. Arsenal supporters would expect Osimhen to score, and not just against weaker teams. They would want him to score in the biggest matches, Champions League nights, title races, derbies, cup finals, away games where Arsenal need a moment of brilliance. That is where the pressure begins. Because if Arsenal spend heavily on Osimhen, he won't be judged only by his statistics, he will be judged by moments. The goal that wins the title, the goal that sends Arsenal through in Europe, the goal against a rival, the late winner, the equaliser, the performance that supporters remember for years. That is the standard, and perhaps Osimhen would welcome that challenge. Now think about Mikel Arteta. Arteta has spent years developing Arsenal into a highly structured team. Every movement matters. Every passing lane matters, every press matters, and adding Osimhen could give Arteta another weapon. Imagine Arsenal recovering the ball in midfield. One pass forward, Osimhen is already running. The defender turns. Osimhen accelerates, the goalkeeper comes out, and suddenly, one-on-one. That is the type of situation Arsenal supporters would love to see, but there is another possibility. Arsenal could use Osimhen against deep defensive blocks. Imagine an opponent defending with 10 players behind the ball. Arsenal circulate possession, the opponent refuses to move, then Arsenal deliver a cross. Osimhen attacks it. Goal! That direct threat can force defensive teams to change their approach, and that could create more opportunities for everyone else. Now think about Arsenal's creative players. If Osimhen is occupying 2 defenders, someone else gets space. If defenders are afraid of his runs, midfielders get more room. If opponents drop deeper, Arsenal can dominate possession higher up the pitch. That is the tactical attraction. Osimhen doesn't have to score every goal to have an impact. His movement can create goals for other players. But there is still a huge question: what happens to Arsenal's existing attackers? This is where the squad becomes fascinating. A player like Osimhen would demand serious minutes. That means competition. And competition can be good. It can force players to improve. It can increase intensity in training. It can make the team stronger. But it can also create difficult decisions. Arteta would have to manage egos. He would have to manage minutes, he would have to rotate intelligently, and he would have to make sure every player understands their role. That is the challenge of building an elite squad. Now let's return to the transfer itself. As of today, the Osimhen to Arsenal move is still not officially completed. That point must be repeated. The latest reporting indicates that Arsenal have explored the deal and that financial conditions remain central to the negotiations. So anyone telling you Osimhen is already an Arsenal player should be treated with caution unless an official announcement has been made. But that doesn't mean Arsenal fans should ignore the story. Quite the opposite. This is exactly the type of transfer that can move very quickly once the major obstacles are removed. And the biggest obstacle appears to be financial agreement. Arsenal reportedly don't want to match Osimhen's current salary demands. So the player may have to make a decision. Does he prioritise the money or does he prioritise the move? Does he want the Premier League? Does he want to play for Arsenal? Does he want to work under Mikel Arteta? Does he want the pressure of competing for major trophies in England? Those questions could determine his future. And there is something else. Time. The transfer window is moving toward its final stages. That means clubs have less time to negotiate. The closer the deadline gets, the greater the pressure becomes. Arsenal cannot spend weeks talking if they want the deal completed. Galatasaray cannot wait forever if they need to plan their squad. Osimhen cannot leave his future unresolved indefinitely. So eventually, someone has to make a decision. Arsenal must decide, how much are we willing to pay? Galatasaray must decide, how much will make us sell? Osimhen must decide, how much am I willing to sacrifice to join Arsenal? And when those three answers meet, we will know whether this transfer becomes reality. Now let's talk about the dream scenario. Arsenal sign Osimhen. He arrives, he completes his medical, he signs the contract, the club announces him, and then comes his first Premier League match. The stadium is full, the atmosphere is unbelievable. The Arsenal supporters are singing, Osimhen walks onto the pitch. First chance, saved. Second chance, wide. Third chance, goal. The Emirates explodes. And suddenly everyone understands why Arsenal fought so hard to get him. Of course, that is the dream. Reality can be different. Every transfer carries risk. A player can struggle with a new league. A striker can suffer injuries. A tactical system can take time to understand, and expectations can become enormous. So Arsenal would need to manage the transition carefully. But if Osimhen adapts up, if he stays fit, if he scores consistently, then Arsenal could have one of the most dangerous attacking weapons in Europe. And that is why this story matters. This isn't just about a name trending on social media. This is about whether Arsenal are prepared to make another major statement. They have ambitions, they want trophies, they want to compete at the highest level, and a player like Osimhen represents that ambition. But there is still one final warning. Do not call this done yet. At the moment, the strongest conclusion is Arsenal are interested. Discussions have reportedly taken place. Osimhen is a serious potential target. But financial terms remain a major issue. Galatasaray remain a major obstacle. And no official Arsenal transfer announcement has confirmed the deal. That means the story is still alive. And perhaps that is what makes it so exciting. Because the next update could be enormous. Arsenal could make progress. Galatasaray could change their stance. Osimhen could make a decision, or Arsenal could walk away. Everything remains on the table. So Arsenal supporters, keep watching, keep checking reliable sources, and most importantly, wait for the official confirmation before celebrating. Because Victor Osimhen to Arsenal is no longer just a fantasy being discussed by fans. There is reported contact, there are reported negotiations, there is a possible pathway, but there is still a mountain to climb. And if Arsenal manage to climb it, we could be looking at one of the biggest Premier League transfers of the summer. Victor Osimhen, Arsenal, the Emirates, the Premier League. Could this be the beginning of a new chapter? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The Osimhen transfer saga is not over. And Arsenal fans, you better stay tuned. Because the next breaking update could change everything. If you enjoyed this transfer breakdown, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us for every major Arsenal transfer update. Until the next breaking